The girl under the crystal sea, when the salvage ship Wayfarer broke atmosphere over Ganymede. The ice sang. Cade heard it through the hull thin, shimmering chorus-like, someone bowing a glass violin along the ship's ribs. He shut down the thrusters and let the glide carry them over the broken plains, where sunlight shattered into 1,000 silver arrows and vanished beneath blue-black ice. Below, old mining rigs hunched like forgotten altars, their booms crusted with hoarfrost and silence. Beyond them, the crystal sea stretched smooth and unending, a lit cathedral with a floor of trapped starlight. "Sing me something," Cade murmured to the ship. The Wayfarer obliged with warm hums and hisses, numbers streaming on the hollow fissures, heat signatures, hollows. Cade sipped stale coffee and held his breath as the scanner snagged on an anomaly, an overlapping geometry where nothing should be. A lattice, a cage, a heart. He took the skimmer down. Winds scratched across the ice, then fell away in a hush so complete it felt like a held note. He cut into the surface with a whispered-in laser and peeled back a window of frost to reveal a face not human, and devastatingly beautiful. She was suspended in a loop of braided frost. Her hair spread like nebulae around her, skin faintly opalescent, the color of moonlight spilled into milk. Her lips were parted slightly, not with breath, but with the memory of one. The lattice around her was not accident or geology. It was a work of intention. A cradle built by hands that knew something about love and fear and hope. Cade's breath clouded the glass. A tiny galaxy formed on the pane and faded. "Who put you here?" he whispered. "And why?" The Wayfarer pinged his wrist with a collision of data, ancient, older than any human machine on Ganymede, aligned to Jovian tides, woven with microchannels of metallic ice that swallowed heat and held it captive. "A cryococoon," Cade said, awed. "A frozen cradle." He felt something ripple through him and ache, like remembering a song from childhood. He'd grown up in a shipyard in the Earth Belt, where the nights smelled like coolant and iron, and someone was always cursing at a nut that wouldn't turn. Humans, he'd learned, made their miracles crooked and laughing, underfunded and on deadline. But this was precise as snowflake logic. This was a poem coded into ice. He placed his palm against the glass and closed his eyes. The first image struck him like a bell, a sea unlike any sea he'd known, its waves tossing with slow photons under a violet sky, towers of living glass leaning toward a white sun, a people with hands of light and voices like instruments and orchestra of speech, and the notes were shapes, and the shapes were meaning. A young woman running along an arcade of frostlit arches, laughing, hair streaming. Her name was. The vision broke, like a breath snatched from a sleeper. "I'm sorry," Cade whispered. "I'm here." Back on the Wayfarer. He rigged the cradle into the cargo hold and wrapped it in shadow and warmth, the way a mother tucks a child under quilts. He told himself he was being clinical salvage, data, relic, but his hands shook when they passed over the cocoon's braided channels. Somewhere, deep within, a swarm of nanofrost fluttered, reweaving its spell. The cocoon had a will. He would have to unbraid it without angering it. Like coaxing a shy animal from a thicket, for 3 days the Wayfarer hung above Ganymede like a bright seed. And Cade worked. He mapped the lattice, learned its pulse. He talked to the ship in a ritual of human stubbornness. "Sing me logs, sing me ancient patents. Sing me bedtime myths of alien winter's end." The Wayfarer obliged, feeding him everything known about heat siphons and crystalline memory and the way information can hide in the geometry of a surface, like a secret folded into paper. Every night he slept beside the cradle on a pallet of tool bags and coats, hearing the faint, impossible music of the ice. On the fourth night, the cocoon sang back. It came as a tremor, felt more in the bones than the ears. The hair on Cade's forearms lifted. He sat up, heart thudding, and lay his hand on the glass again. A flickerish shape, a syllable. Leora, he breathed, without knowing how he knew. Your name is Leora. The lattice quickened, as if pleased. A ribbon of frost unspooled and touched his palm. It was colder than truth. Images flowed, not a narrative, not at first, but fragments stitched with longing. A council of elders under a vault of living snow, their faces refracted into constellations, the taste of a fruit that grew only where the glaciers drank lightning, a horizon that sang every morning, the shock of footsteps in a sanctum, metal boots, not ours, not hers. Others, the elders, were packing memories into Leora's hair, winding threads of light into each strand. They kissed her brow with voices that were chords. They sealed her in the cradle. Then came the machines, not human machines. Predators built from hunger with 1,000 bright eyes. Leora's world had not died. It had hidden her. It had made a promise. Wake when it is safe to love again. Cade's throat tightened. He leaned his forehead against the cold. I'll get you out, he said. I swear. Humans were good at simple vows. Even when the mathematics were terrible, he began the unbraiding. He printed a forest of microneedles and taught them to sing. He dripped warmth like candlelight into the channels, letting the cocoon learn his heat as a name. He timed his pulses to Jovian tides so that the lattice thought the moon herself was soothing it. He talked to Leora as he worked, because the talking kept his hands steady, and because he remembered the shipyard the way one talked to old bolts and new engines until they came loose or came alive. He told her about earth, water, the way it smelled of stones and leaves. He told her about rain you could touch with your tongue. He told her about the first time he saw Jupiter up close, how he cried and lied about the reason. He played her music. Human music. Not the careful crystal phrases her people had woven, but things with air and mistakes in them, like bodies. She seemed to like the piano. When he played Debussy at 3 a.m., the cocoon sent up little halos of fog that caught the cargo bay lights and turned them into angels. On the 7th day, her fingers moved, just the smallest flecks against the frost. Like a bird unlearning its cage, he nearly ruined everything in his joy. Heat flared, alarms went off, the lattice recoiled like a wounded thing. He cut the feed, sat on the floor, and laughed and cried into his hands while the ship beeped in gentle reprimand. Okay, he said hoarsely. Slow, we do this slow. Humans are good at hurry. The miracle was that he learned patience. On the 15th day, Leora's eyes opened. They were the color of a lake at noon, too clear to be entirely comforting. The kind of clarity that sees through you and forgives you anyway. Frost blossomed with each of her breaths, then steadied. She looked at him, and Cade felt his heart spin like a compass near a magnet. Hi, he said softly. I'm Cade. This is the Wayfarer. You're safe. A ripple, like wind across the surface of a frozen river. Then a voice. It wasn't sound at first. It was temperature. It was a change in humidity. It was a drift of snowflake fractals, spelling something old. I hear you. I'm going to teach you a simpler way to speak, he said, touching the glass. He pointed to himself. Cade, he pointed to her. Leora, she watched his mouth. Very slowly, with a husk of breath and the patience of glaciers, she formed the syllables K, D, and then, breath fogging the barrier, Li, or A, he had to sit down. They went on that way for another weak language as a bridge made of steam and smiles. Sometimes she fell asleep and the ice printed dreams against the glass. Noble arches, running, kisses, fear. The machines came again and again in metaphor, each time with more teeth. He asked the wayfarer for news of the outer dark. The ship fed him a catalogue of hazards. None matched Leora's monsters. Maybe they were far. Maybe time had gnawed them down. Maybe the promise of safety had been kept and she could wake without. Sorrow, he took a risk. He cut the last braid of the cocoon, the ice sighed. Warmth rose like bread in an oven. Leora flinched as air touched her bare shoulders for the first time in centuries. Cade slipped an emergency thermal around her, and it swallowed her like a storm cloud. She shivered, blinked, and the ship's gravity took hold of her as lightly as a hand. When her feet touched the floor, she held on to him gently at first, then with a fierce, childlike strength. He held her back. Human heat. Human heartbeat. The ship dimmed the lights to a dusk and played the music it had learned she liked. A piano that seemed to be remembering moonlight on water. Water, Leora whispered, echoing his word. Stone smell. Rain on. Tongue, you remember, he breathed. From me, she tipped her head, hair spilling like starlight. You put your memories in the air, she said, her accent a glove over syllables, and I drink them. Very human. Very messy, he said, smiling through wet eyes. We're good at that. She laughed, and if ice could laugh, it would sound like that. He showed her the ship in patient half-hour lessons, the galley with its flavors of cinnamon and coffee and burnt toast, the engineering bay with its feral cables and purring cores. She learned ferociously. She learned the way climbers learn, with her hands, tasting the metal, palming the hum of the wayfarer's heart as if the ship were a cat. Night she dreamed into the air. Cade woke often with her. Hair fanned across his wrist and little halos of frost at the edges of pillows that vanished when he spoke her name. He told himself there would be an ending, there had to be, because things break. Because time is a saw. But he avoided the shape of that ending like a narrow rock in a wide river, when he told her about Earth properly, with maps and oceans and every stupid fight and stubborn tenderness his species had poured into that blue coin. She put her hands to her mouth. You are loud, she said solemnly, and then, and bright. You fight and sing. You call your home by the name of ground, and then you leave it. He shifted in his seat. We fall in love with horizons, he said. We think the world wants us to chase it. It's not noble, necessarily. Sometimes it's greed. Sometimes it's grief. But sometimes he looked up. Sometimes it's love. Humans, she murmured, tasting the word like fruit. Yes, she kissed him that night, slow and experimental. It was like teaching rain to patter on a new eve. She'd been kissed once before by elders and companions, on brow and hand, a blessing at the gate to the ice. This was not a benediction. This was a discovery. And it went on until both of them were laughing like children who've just learned to run. They did not make promises then. They fell asleep with his nose in the curve of her shoulder and the ship humming lullabies in the vents. In the morning, the wayfarer screamed, not a sound exactly an alarm that painted the air with red and shook the bones of the ship. Cade was on his feet before his thoughts arrived. Leora was right behind him. They slammed into the cockpit like two waves meeting and stared into Jupiter's great eye as somewhere beyond the limb. A shadow moved. The machines, they uncurled from behind, a minor moonlit like spiders stepping into a lamp's circle. Not dozens, not thousands. 3, that was enough. They were shaped for cold. Their surfaces drank light. They wore a livery of mathematics Cade couldn't pass, but Leora inhaled sharply and pressed her fingers to the glass. They found the promise, she said. The cradle sang, and they came to silence it. Instinct said run. Reason said hide. Love said not without her. Humans are very good at doing the unreasonable thing if someone they love is behind them. Cade stripped the wayfarer to its simple truths: fuel, thrust, heat, heart. He yanked out backup lines, sacrificed comfort to speed. He looked at Leora. Can you teach me to sing like the cocoon? She blinked. That is a language of ice and years. We have minutes, he said gently. So we'll translate. In the memory of her people, the cradle sang in lattice and tides. Cade had engines and pipes and a stubborn ship that loved him like an old dog. He rerouted exhaust through the cooling veins, built harmonics in the radiator fins, tuned the reactor's thrum with a hacksaw and a prayer. Teach me the shape of no, he said. Leora pressed her forehead to his and breathed rhythm against his mouth. He made the engine breathe that rhythm. She traced refusal in frost on his wrist. He etched it in the way the wayfarer's radiators flashed. The machines drew closer, tasting for heat with their 100 bright eyes. The wayfarer glided dumb and cold as if she had died. When the first machine fired a skitter of needles across the ice and Cade watched them skip to a halt beside the mining rigs, he met the horizon with his jaw set and said, now. They sang not with notes, but with heat signatures trailered like banners, with coolant pulled in gusts, with reactor heartbeats. The wayfarer flashed a geometry of patience in winter, of stone and water, of no. Humans said no with their bodies sometimes strikes, marches stubbornly standing in a line. The ship said no with the shape of her spent breath. The front machine hesitated, then the second turned its head, not ahead. Really, but the gesture was eerily like the way an animal pauses when something does not fit its hunt. The third machine, nearer the mining rigs, reared back. Its carapace opened like a black flower, and the device inside sharp as bankruptcy glinted. They're not listening, Cade said between his teeth. Leora stepped forward and undid the wayfarer's small window. Cold snapped like a wolf at the opening. She placed her hands on the hull. Then we sing human, she said. She breathed out. The metal frosted under her palms, a fine and furious lace. Her hair lifted like a tide turning. The ship's skin printed with patterns that were older than Jupiter's storms. And each pattern was a story of the day her people first learned to catch lightning on their tongues, of the night they hid their daughter in ice, of the promise whispered not to be broken. Cade understood this much. Meaning is heat. Love is a pattern that endures. He added to it, the hollows of Earth's oceans flickering in the cockpit like a dare. The taste of cinnamon toast Leora had claimed as a new god. His shipyard song of hammers and swears. The memory of a boy crying at the first sight of Jupiter and lying about the rain in his eyes. The wayfarer, blazed dot for a single breath. The machines stopped. The one by the rigs made a sound like teeth breaking. A crack zigzagged across its surface. Water, no, not water, something clear and wet and wrong dripped and boiled away. The machine released a thin, astonished keening and scuttled backward. The others took a small, involuntary step away from the pattern the ship made. Go. Leora whispered to them, to everything, to the scared animals they were in their cause. Go back to your night. There is nothing here you can own. Asterisk, the machines withdrew. Not far. Not forever. Just enough. Cade let out a long breath he felt he'd been holding for years. He wrapped his arms around Leora from behind and pressed his cheek to her temple. The window sealed with a sigh. The wayfarer settled under their hands like a bird folding its wings. Humans are special, Leora said softly, as if trying the phrase on, as if it might break between her teeth. He smiled tiredly into her hair. Sometimes it means we're brave, he said. Sometimes it just means we're loud and hard to kill. Sometimes, she said, it means you sing when you are afraid. That is a good special. They left Ganymede behind, a jewel under a colossus, and threaded the road of moons. Cade made a bed for her out of spare blankets and stubbornness. He cooked for her badly and watched her fall in love with miso soup as if it were a parent she'd never met. He showed her Saturn's rings at dawn. She showed him how to hear the conversations hiding in snow, when earth grew from coin to plate to window-filling miracle. Leora stood with a hand on the glass and cried in a way that left no wetness, just a soft recrystallizing of the air. Stone smell, she murmured. Water, tongue, rain. Home, he said, with the fear that the word might be too heavy. If you want it. She looked at him, lay clear eyes holding all the weight of her choice. I want you, she said simply. Home can be many things. You taught me that. They learned the choreography of a life. She took to the language like a river learns banks. She took to humans like a winter blooming into spring. She kept the wayfarer cold in summer to make the walls sing. She kissed him with slow patience and sometimes with a hunger that startled them both. They fought twice spectacularly. Gloriously human fights about nothing and everything. Once about the way he forgot to sleep when a job consumed him. Once about her desire to keep the apartment below freezing so the windows printed frost poems. Both times they apologized poorly and then, later, beautifully. Both times they made promises neither expected to keep perfectly, and then kept them better than expected anyway. On the anniversary of her awakening, they returned to the ice, not to Ganymede, that would be foolish, until the machines changed their minds, but to a valley in the Earth's far south where the snow squeaked under their boots and the sky felt like a statement. Cade carried a coil of silver wire. Leora carried a small box of hair. She had salvaged it from the cocoon, the threads under her scalp that still held her people's light. She wove the hair into the wire and the wire into a pattern on the face of a glacier, humming the whole while. Cade was there with his hands in hers when the glacier answered, not as her cradle had, but in the old way of earth cracking, groaning, singing a bass line to her bright melody. Asterisk, they made a promise to the ice, to remember, to not let the machines of hunger have the last word in any language, to keep choosing each other in the brief weather of their lives, after they'd bound the last knot, after the sun had done that impossible southern thing of falling sideways through sky. She turned to Cade with snow in her hair and said, "If we break this promise, we won't," he said, "because humans are sometimes very simple and very sure. And sometimes that is a prayer. She smiled. If we do, tell me again about cinnamon toast. That will fix me. Cinnamon toast can fix anything, he said gravely, and she laughed, and the glazier took note. They danced there, clumsy in their boots, dignified in their love, while the world turned and Jupiter hung far away like an old god peering through curtains. They were small. They were loud. They were hard to kill. They were, most importantly, together much later, when strangers would ask about the myth of the girl under the crystal sea, when children would press fingers to the glass of museums displaying the cut braid of alien ice and ask if that was where the princess slept. People would say, no, she didn't sleep forever. She woke up and she learned us, and we learned her. That is the miracle. They would not mention the machines in every telling, but the elders who kept the stories would remember. They would say, when they came, we did not shoot first, we sang. We said no with the heat of our bodies and the pattern of our love. And some night, at some window where frost grows from breath into lace, a child will write a promise with a fingertip and watch it vanish back into air, and know it still holds. The wayfarer, an old ship by then, would sometimes hum to herself in the hangar, absolutely certain that somewhere in the snow, someone was listening, because love, like ice, remembers its shape, and because humans, when we are at our best, keep singing.